The courtyard was slick with rain when they cornered her. The kind of cold, wet night where screams get swallowed by the traffic. Black SUV, tinted windows, the air changing the moment he stepped onto the pavement. Everyone in the city knew who he was. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to end a life. But Rhea Vale didn't look away like everyone else. Not because she was brave, but because she was desperate. Shoved into the mud, humiliated, with no allies left, she realized she had 3 seconds before she was destroyed. She needed a shield. She needed a weapon. And she saw him. "That's him," she screamed, her voice breaking despite the terror in her eyes. She pointed a trembling finger at the shadow and shouted the lie that would seal her fate. "That's my husband. Touch me, and he'll kill you." The entire courtyard froze. To the world, it looked suicidal, delusional, insane. You don't claim a predator as a pet. But Victor Caldero didn't expose her. He didn't execute her for the insult. He walked over, pulled her from the mud, and wrapped a heavy, possessive arm around her waist. "Sorry I'm late, darling," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, but his eyes cold as ice. And in that moment, as the bullies fled and he shoved her into his armored car, Rhea realized the truth. She hadn't just escaped a bully. She had just volunteered to be the wife of a monster. And he wasn't going to let her walk away. What happened after that door closed reshaped the entire underworld. Stay with me until the end. Because what happened after that lie will make you rethink power, survival, and fear itself. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The tray of champagne flutes weighed less than the shame, but Rhea Vale carried both with a practiced, hollow stare. The Sterling Hotel ballroom was a sea of black ties and diamond-studded hypocrisy, a charity gala for the city's orphans thrown by the very men who created them. Rhea moved through the crowd like a ghost. 3 years ago, she would have been wearing silk, sipping the vintage Dom Perignon she was now serving. That was before her father's arrest, the seized assets, and the headlines that branded the name Vale as synonymous with fraud. Now, she was just the help, invisible behind a stiff collar and a forced neutrality. "Table 4 is dry," the floor manager hissed into her earpiece. "Move, Vale." Rhea turned sharply, her eyes fixed on the exit sign glowing green in the distance. Her shift was over in 10 minutes. If she could just make it to the service alley without making eye contact, she would survive another night. She pushed through the heavy velvet curtains toward the valet exit, the cool night air biting at her flushed skin. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon. She huddled into her thin coat, fumbling for her phone to check the bus schedule. "Well, look what the gutter washed up." The voice was lazy, arrogant, and terrified her more than the thunder. Rhea froze. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Julian Vance. His father had been the lead prosecutor on her dad's case. Julian had been the boy who poured punch on her dress at prom. She gripped her purse strap, keeping her head down. "I'm just leaving, Julian." "Leaving?" Footsteps crunched on the wet gravel. "Not one set. 3. But the party's just getting started. And you haven't even said hello to your old friends." Rhea tried to step around him, but a hand shot out, slamming against the brick wall next to her head. She gasped, backing up until her spine hit the cold, rough stone. Julian stood there, flanked by 2 other heirs to the city's corruption, Marcus and Cole. They wore tuxedos that cost more than she earned in a year, and they looked at her with the hungry, cruel amusement of cats cornering a mouse. "You know," Julian sneered, stepping into her personal space, smelling of expensive whiskey and malice. "My dad says your father is rotting in that cell, crying every night. Does that run in the family, Rhea? Do you cry?" "Let me pass," Rhea whispered, her voice trembling. "Or what?" Marcus laughed, snatching the phone from her hand. "You'll call the police?" "We are the police, sweetheart. Or at least, our dads own them." He tossed her phone to Cole, who juggled it mockingly. They were closing in, cutting off her escape, pushing her further into the shadows of the courtyard. The rain plastered her hair to her face, masking the tears of frustration stinging her eyes. She was trapped, powerless, and they were enjoying every second of it. Headlights swept across the wet pavement, cutting through the gloom like searchlights. The low, guttural thrum of a heavy engine vibrated in Rhea's chest, drowning out Julian's taunts for a heartbeat. A massive black SUV, armored and sleek as a bullet, rolled into the courtyard. It didn't pull into a designated spot. It simply stopped in the center of the lane, blocking the exit, claiming the space with the arrogance of a tank. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like obsidian, reflecting the distorted faces of Rhea's tormentors. "Who the hell is this?" Marcus muttered, shielding his eyes from the glare. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. The air in the courtyard seemed to vanish. He was a giant, easily over 6 feet, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his long, black wool coat. His head was shaved, the rain glistening on his scalp, drawing attention to the intricate, dark ink that crawled up his neck like thorny vines. Victor Caldero. He didn't look at the gala guests. He didn't look at the valet stand. He stood by the open door of his vehicle, checking a silver watch on his wrist with bored, lethal precision. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone carved by violence. He radiated a cold, magnetic danger that made the hair on Rhea's arms stand up. He was a shark swimming in a pool of goldfish, utterly indifferent to the prey around him. "Some trash from the other side of town," Julian scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual bite. He glanced at the stranger, then dismissed him, turning his sneer back to Rhea. "Ignore him. Look at me when I'm talking to you, Vale." Rhea couldn't look away from the stranger. He was her only distraction, a terrifying anomaly in her nightmare. "I said look at me." Julian's patience snapped. He shoved her, hard. Rhea wasn't ready. Her heels slipped on the slick cobblestones. She flailed, gasping as gravity took over. She hit the wet pavement with a bone-jarring thud, the impact tearing through her nylons and scraping the skin off her knees. Mud and freezing water soaked instantly into her uniform. She scrambled to push herself up, crouching defensively, her breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. She looked small, broken, and completely cornered. "Pathetic," Cole laughed, looming over her. "Maybe you belong in the dirt." Rhea looked up, blinking through the rain and tears. Beyond the legs of her tormentors, she saw the man by the SUV. He hadn't moved. He hadn't reacted. He was just standing there, a dark monolith against the city lights. And in that split second, facing the humiliation of her past and the brutality of her present, Rhea realized she had nothing left to lose. The impact jarred her teeth. Cold water soaked through her stockings, stinging her scraped knees as the mud seeped into the fabric of her uniform. Above her, Julian and his lackeys were silhouettes of jagged laughter, blocking out the gala lights. They were closing in, their shadows stretching over her like prison bars. They were going to destroy her. Not just tonight, but forever. They would plant the phone, call the cops, and finish what their fathers started. She would be the thief, the liar, the inmate. Rhea's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She scrambled backward on her hands and heels, her breath hitching in a sob. She looked for an escape, a witness, anything. Her gaze snagged on the man by the black SUV. He was still there, still watching. He hadn't moved a muscle, his dark coat swallowing the light, his face a mask of bored, lethal indifference. He looked like a weapon waiting for a trigger. He was the most terrifying thing in the city, a man who ate predators like Julian for breakfast. A weapon. The thought wasn't a plan. It was a spasm of survival instinct. Logic abandoned her. Fear clarified her. She needed a monster to scare away the wolves. Rhea didn't try to stand. She stayed low, crouched in the mud, coiled like a cornered animal. She raised a shaking hand, extending her finger until it pointed accusingly, desperately, directly at the silent giant. "That's him." The scream tore from her throat, raw and ragged, cutting through the rain. The laughter above her stopped instantly. Julian froze, his hand halfway to grabbing her shoulder. Rhea didn't let the silence settle. She pushed the lie out with every ounce of breath she had left, infusing it with a frantic, terrifying conviction. She glared at Julian, her eyes wide and manic, banking everything on a bluff that could get her killed. "That's my husband," she shrieked, her fingers still leveled at the unmoving crime lord. "Touch me one more time, and you deal with him." The lie hung in the humid air like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the relentless drumming of rain against the asphalt and the low, menacing idol of the SUV's engine. Julian's hand, inches from grabbing Rhea's wet coat, froze. The sneer dropped from his face, replaced by a flicker of confusion that rapidly curdled into something uglier. He didn't want to look. He wanted to laugh, to mock her desperation, to tell her she was crazy. But the sheer, hysterical conviction in her voice forced him to turn his head. He followed the line of her trembling finger. Marcus and Cole turned with him, their cruel laughter dying in their throats. They looked at the man standing by the black armored door. The courtyard lights reflected off the wet pavement, illuminating the jagged ink climbing the stranger's neck, thorny vines that disappeared into his collar, marking him as something far more dangerous than a gala guest. They saw the way he stood, balanced and still, like a loaded gun. They saw the driver inside the SUV, a shadow behind bulletproof glass, watching them with the detached boredom of a professional killer. Recognition hit Julian first. It wasn't the polite recognition of high society. It was the primal, gut-wrenching recognition of a gazelle spotting a lion. Caldero, Marcus whispered, the name slipping out like a curse. The blood drained from Julian's face so fast, it left him looking gray in the neon light. He took a stumbling step back, his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the wet stones. These were men who played with money and lawyers, who used their fathers' names as shields. They didn't play with men who owned the police. They didn't play with the grim reaper of the underworld. Rhea watched the terror bloom in their eyes, a vindictive spark warming her chest despite the cold rain. But the terror wasn't just theirs. It was hers, too. Because the man they were staring at, the man she had just claimed as her own, was moving. Victor Caldero lowered his wrist. He stopped checking the time. Slowly, with the terrifying grace of a shifting tectonic plate, he turned his head. He didn't look at Julian. He didn't look at the SUV. He looked down, his dark, heavy gaze landing squarely on Rhea. He saw the mud staining her knees. He saw the tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. And he saw the fingers still pointing at his chest, accusing him of a marriage that didn't exist. The silence stretched, thin and brittle, ready to snap. He didn't blink. He didn't frown. He just stared at her, dissecting her soul with eyes that were blacker than the night, weighing her life against his curiosity. Victor didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence he commanded was heavier than any shout. He stepped away from the armored SUV, the heavy door clicking shut behind him with a sound like a coffin lid closing. He began to walk. He didn't rush. His movements were terrifyingly controlled, a slow, hydraulic inevitability that made the breath hitch in Rhea's throat. Step, step, step. The sound of his heavy military-style boots striking the wet cobblestones echoed in the courtyard, a rhythmic drumbeat of approaching doom. Julian, Marcus, and Cole scrambled backward, their expensive dress shoes skidding on the slick pavement as they tried to put distance between themselves and the approaching titan. They pressed themselves against the brick wall, making themselves small, their earlier bravado dissolving into the rain. They were forgotten. Victor didn't even spare them a glance. His eyes were locked entirely on Rhea. She was still crouched in the mud, her hand trembling as she lowered it, the adrenaline of her lie draining away to leave a cold, paralyzing dread. What have I done? The thought screamed in her mind. She had tried to scare off wolves by summoning a dragon. Victor closed the distance. 10 feet. 5 feet. 2. He stopped directly in front of her. From her vantage point on the ground, he looked like a skyscraper, a monolith of black wool and muscle blocking out the hotel lights, blocking out the rain, blocking out the world. His shadow fell over her, swallowing her whole. She could smell him now, a sharp, clean scent of rain, leather, and something metallic, like a gun just fired. Rhea stopped breathing. She tilted her head back, her neck straining to look up at his face. Rainwater dripped from the brim of her nose. Mingling with the tears, she couldn't stop. She waited for the anger. She waited for him to laugh, to kick her aside, to tell the trembling heirs in the corner that he had never seen this crazy woman before in his life. She waited to be destroyed. But Victor just stood there, staring down at her with an expression that terrified her more than rage. He was calm. He was calculating. He was looking at her not as a nuisance, but as a variable in an equation he was currently solving. The tattoos on his neck glistened in the gloom, dark vines constricting around his throat. The silence stretched until it was suffocating. Rhea squeezed her eyes shut, her body tensed for the impact, wishing the ground would open up and take her. Then, the shadow moved. Rhea flinched as the shadow descended. She squeezed her eyes shut, her muscles locking up, waiting for the backhand that would shatter her jaw or the bullet that would end it all. But the blow never came. Instead, a hand, large, warm, and rough with calluses, enveloped her trembling fingers. Rhea's eyes snapped open. She didn't have time to process the sensation before he pulled. It wasn't a helping hand, it was a hoist. With terrifying ease, Victor jerked her upward, lifting her from the mud as if she weighed nothing more than a wet rag doll. Gravity seemed to reverse until her feet scrambled for purchase on the pavement and her body collided with a wall of solid muscle. He didn't let go. His arm, heavy and hard as an iron bar, clamped around her waist, crushing her wet, shivering form against the expensive wool of his coat. The heat radiating from him was shocking, searing through the damp chill of her uniform. In an instant, she had gone from a victim crouching in the dirt to a woman shielded by the most dangerous man in the city. Rhea gasped, looking up, but his face wasn't turned toward her. His cold, predatory gaze was fixed over the top of her head, locking onto the three men pressed against the brick wall. "Darling," Victor said. The word rolled off his tongue like dark honey, rich and deceptively sweet, but the vibration in his chest against her ribcage felt like a growl. It was a performance, but it was flawless. He tightened his grip on her waist, his fingers digging into her hip, silently warning her not to pull away, not to breathe, not to ruin the script she had started. "I told you to wait inside," he continued, his voice dropping an octave, pitching perfectly between an affectionate scold and a lethal warning. "You know I don't like it when you get wet." He brushed a strand of wet hair from her face with his free hand. The gesture looked tender to the audience, but Rhea felt the calloused pad of his thumb trace her jawline with a pressure that was terrifyingly possessive. He was marking his territory. Julian, Marcus, and Cole looked as if they were watching a nightmare come to life. The arrogance that had defined them moments ago had evaporated, leaving behind only the naked, trembling fear of prey, realizing they had cornered the wrong animal. They stared at Victor's arm wrapped around Rhea, at the way the lord of the underworld held the catering girl like she was a queen. The lie had become flesh. And now, they were the ones in the mud. "We didn't know." Julian's voice cracked, a pathetic sound that was swallowed by the rain. He was backing away, hands raised in surrender, eyes darting between Victor's impassive face and Rhea's trembling form. "We didn't know she was with you. Mrs. Caldero. We're leaving." Marcus and Cole didn't even speak. They turned and scrambled toward the valet stand, their dignity abandoned in the puddles. Julian cast one last, terrified look at the tattoo creeping up Victor's neck, then turned and ran, his footsteps frantic on the wet pavement. They were gone. The threat was neutralized. Rhea let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for a lifetime. Her knees rushed with weakness, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. She looked up at the man who had just saved her, ready to stammer out a thank you, ready to apologize for the insanity of her lie, ready to run to the bus stop and disappear. "Thank you," she breathed, stepping back to create a polite distance. "I don't know why you played along, but you saved my life. I'll go now." The arm around her waist didn't loosen. In fact, it tightened, not with the protective embrace of a husband, but with the iron grip of a captor. Victor looked down at her. The wolfish, charming smile he had worn for the audience vanished as if it had never existed. It didn't fade slowly. It was deleted, replaced instantly by the cold, dead stare of a predator who has secured his meal. The warmth she had felt radiating from him suddenly felt suffocating. "You're not going anywhere," he said. His voice was no longer velvet. It was gravel and ice. He released her waist only to reach past her. His hand, large and gloved in black leather, gripped the handle of the armored SUV's rear door. He pulled it open with a heavy, pressurized thunk. The interior was a cavern of dark leather and shadows. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a holding cell. Rhea froze, the rain plastering her hair to her cheeks. Panic, sharper and more primal than what she had felt with Julian, spiked in her chest. "Excuse me." Victor didn't explain. He didn't negotiate. He didn't ask. He gestured to the dark, open maw of the back seat with a slight jerk of his chin. Get in. It wasn't an offer. It wasn't a request. It was a command spoken with the absolute authority of a man who was used to being obeyed or burying those who refused. Rhea looked at the open door, then back at the empty courtyard. The gala music drifted faintly from the hotel, a world away. She was alone with him. She had claimed him. She had called down the devil to scare away the demons, and now the devil was waiting for his due. I can't, she whispered, stepping back. Victor stepped forward, blocking her retreat, blocking the light, blocking everything. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a wall she couldn't climb. You just told half the city you're my wife, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. If you walk away now, you make me a liar. And I don't let loose ends walk away. He pointed into the car again. Get in. The heavy thud of the door sealing shut cut off the rain, the city noise, and the last shred of Rhea's freedom. The lock engaged with a mechanical click that sounded final. The interior of the SUV was a fortress of black leather and silence. The air was cool, filtered, and smelled of sanitized danger. Rhea pressed herself against the door, her wet coat dripping onto the plush floor mats, trying to put as much distance as possible between herself and the man who occupied the other side of the bench seat. The car accelerated smoothly, merging into the traffic that Rhea had been watching from the sidewalk just minutes ago. Victor didn't look at her. He adjusted his cuff, brushing off a drop of rainwater with casual indifference. The warmth, the protective arm, the darling. It was all gone, peeled away like a costume. In its place was a terrifying void. He took a phone from his pocket, typed a short message, and slid it back into his coat. Then he turned his head. His eyes were dead things. No anger. No amusement. Just the flat, biological assessment of a predator deciding how to dismantle prey. You have 10 seconds, Victor said, his voice low and vibrationless in the quiet cabin, to explain why I shouldn't open this door and throw you out onto the highway. Rhea's breath hitched. She looked at the door handle, then at the blur of lights passing the tinted window. They were moving too fast. I didn't mean to. 1, Victor counted. He shifted, his knee brushing hers. The contact made her jump. I don't believe in coincidences. Who sent you? Was it the Russians? Or is the DEA hiring actresses now? No one sent me. Rhea cried, the words tumbling out in a panic. I don't know who you are. I mean, I know who you are, everyone does, but I don't know you. 4. He leaned in, invading her space, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the car. You pointed a finger at a man with a price on his head and claimed to be his wife in a public place. That's not an accident. That's a suicide note or a strategy. Which is it? It was survival. Rhea shouted, pressing her back against the leather. They were going to arrest me. Julian Vance and his friends. They were going to plant a stolen phone on me. They did it to my father, and they were going to do it to me. I had no way out. Victor paused at the count of 7. His eyes narrowed slightly, scanning her face, searching for the micro-expressions of a liar. So you saw me, he said, his voice dangerously soft. And you thought I looked like a savior? No, Rhea whispered, shaking her head. I thought you looked like a monster. The word hung in the air between them. I needed something scarier than them, she confessed, her voice trembling. I needed a monster to scare away the wolves. You were the only thing in that courtyard that they were afraid of. Victor stared at her. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He looked at her wet hair, her scraped knees, and the raw, terrified honesty in her eyes. He was a human lie detector, a man who had survived by reading betrayal in a blink. He didn't see betrayal. He saw a desperate animal that had bitten the hand of a god because it was drowning. A monster, he repeated, testing the word. He sat back, the tension in his shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. Well, you certainly found one. Victor watched her for a long moment, the streetlights casting rhythmic shadows across his sharp features. The silence in the car wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with calculation. He saw the terror in her eyes. Yes, but beneath it, he saw the steel that had made her point that finger. She was desperate, reckless, and a liar. She was perfect. The summit is in 3 days, Victor said abruptly, the change in topic jarring Rhea. The 5 families are meeting to discuss a ceasefire. They think I'm too volatile, too aggressive. They're looking for a reason to move against me. Rhea stared at him, confused. I don't understand. A wife makes a man look stable, Victor continued, his voice devoid of sentiment. A civilian wife makes him look distracted, domesticated. It lowers their guard. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I need a cover, Rhea, and you need a monster. Rhea pressed her back against the door, her heart hammering. You want me to pretend? I want you to be Mrs. Caldero, he corrected. In public. On paper. You wear the ring. You stand by my side. You smile when I touch you, and you look at me like I'm the sun and the stars. You play the part you started in that courtyard, but you play it until I say cut. And if I refuse, then I open this door, Victor said simply. And you go back to the mud. Back to Julian Vance. Back to prison. Rhea flinched. The memory of Julian's laugh, of the hopelessness that had nearly drowned her, stung worse than the cold. But if you agree, Victor's voice dropped, becoming a low, seductive rumble. Then you are under my protection, and the name Caldero carries weight. He paused, letting the words sink in. Julian Vance. His father. The men who destroyed your family. I can burn their world to the ground before breakfast. I can make them beg you for forgiveness. I can give you the one thing the law never did. What? Rhea whispered. Justice. The word hung in the air, glittering and dangerous. Justice. It was a fantasy she had given up on years ago. But looking at Victor, at the brutal, absolute power etched into his very posture, she knew he wasn't lying. He could destroy them. He could make them feel the fear she had felt every day for 3 years. Victor extended his hand. It was the same hand that had pulled her from the dirt, large and scarred, a weapon offered in peace. So, he murmured, his eyes dark with challenge. Do we have a deal, darling? Rhea looked at his hand. She looked at the rain streaking the window, blurring the city that had chewed her up and spit her out. She looked back at the monster who was offering her a throne in hell. She didn't tremble this time. She reached out and placed her hand in his. Deal, she said. Victor's fingers closed around hers, sealing the pact. He didn't smile. He just nodded, a general accepting a soldier. As the car sped into the night, Rhea realized the terrifying truth. She hadn't just saved her life. She had sold it. And looking at the man beside her, she wasn't sure she wanted it back.